Hi there. Thank you for joining us tonight for our conversation between artist Genevieve Kenyard and Wanda Raimundi-Ortiz, sponsored by the Greenberg-Steinhauser Forum in American Portraiture Conversation Series. I'm Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw. I'm the senior historian and the acting chief curator here at the National Portrait Gallery. I'm also the director of Portal, the National Portrait Gallery Scholarly Center, which organizes these talks. At the National Portrait Gallery, we believe that portraiture is powerful. And even though our galleries are presently closed to the public, we're eager to share some of that power with you through these online engagements. Because we'll be showing images as a part of tonight's presentation, we encourage you to select the gallery active speaker or thumbnail view from the right-hand corner of your screen in order to better see our panelists. And we will also have closed captioning available, which can be accessed along the bottom menu. There'll be a Q&A function, a question and answer function, into which you're welcome to submit questions for our speakers. I'd also like to invite you to join us again on Tuesday, September 1st at noon Eastern time, a slightly different time than we usually do these, when curator Leslie Uriña will lead a conversation with artist Li Mingwei and vocalist Barita Poulsen about the transnational aspects of their work and the impact of the pandemic on performance art. Li Mingwei's Sonic Blossom performance piece was presented as part of the Portrait Gallery's Identify Performance Art series in 2018. And during the program, Li's collaborator, Barita Poulsen, will perform a piece called Invitation for Dawn, which is a sister project to Sonic Blossom, which was developed by Li. For tonight's program, we welcome artists Wanda Raimundi-Ortiz and Genevieve Kenyard. And I'm very pleased that the National Portrait Gallery's curator of painting and sculpture and Latinx art and history, Taína Caragol, will be moderating. Taína's scholarship focuses on Latinx and Latin American art and its institutional and market validation, as well as on the recovery of history suppressed by colonialism. Since joining the Portrait Gallery in 2013, she has significantly increased the representation of Latinx historical figures and artists in the permanent collection. And I mean significantly, as in adding hundreds of portraits of important Latinas, Latinos, and Latinx identified people who were previously unrepresented in the collection. Taína curated One Life, Dolores Huerta, and co-curated Unseen, Unseen, Our Past in a New Light, Ken Gonzalez-Day and Titus Kapfar, as well as the Outwind 2019 American Portraiture Today. Her upcoming shows include 1898, The American Imperium, and the Outwind 2022. Taína holds degrees from the University of Puerto Rico and Middlebury College, and she received her PhD in art history from the Graduate Center at City University of New York. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Taína Caragol. Taína.
Thank you so much, Gwendolyn. I am grateful and honored to collaborate with you to share the Portrait Gallery's work with our audiences through the Greenberg-Steinhauser Forum in American Portraiture. This is a difficult time, but I am heartened by the possibility of connecting virtually with audiences globally and to explore the pertinence and vibrancy of portraiture today and its potential to help us understand each other better and to build social cohesion and justice for all. Thank you so much, Jackie, for all the work you put into organizing this event. Jackie Petito, you're the best. And thank you as well, Haley Kroll, for helping Jackie tonight manage the technical aspects of the evening. And I am absolutely delighted to be here tonight in dialogue with two contemporary artists whose work has been showcased at the Portrait Gallery and who position their own bodies at the center of their artistic practices to explore identity and in particular issues of race, class, and gender. And so we'll be having a dialogue tonight with a number of slides that represent some of their bodies of work, and so we can delve into their inspiration, their motivations for making identity-based work, their method for doing so, their different approaches, and we can learn as well a little bit about their particular artworks. I will introduce them now. Genevieve Kenyard is a Los Angeles-based artist whose work focuses on installation, sculpture, and photographic self-portraiture to explore race, femininity, and class. As a biracial woman in the US, Gaignard investigates the aesthetic and cultural divide between Black and white, a chasm as palpable as it is invisible. She interrogates notions of passing by positioning her own female body as the chief site of exploration, challenging viewers to navigate the powers and anxieties of intersectional identity. Her work has been featured in numerous solo and group exhibitions at museums such as the National Portrait Gallery, the Crystal Bridges Museum of Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the California African American Museum, the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, and Prospect 4, New Orleans. Gaignard received her BFA in photography from Massachusetts College of Art and Design and her MFA in photography from Yale University. Wanda Raimundi-Ortiz is an internationally recognized interdisciplinary artist whose work dissects the cultural and social constructs of otherness. She fiercely advocates for visibility and inclusion of underrepresented voices in the arts and academia. Her work is about rebelliously claiming a place within establishments not designed for the cultural other. With that same restless spirit, fueled on humor, heartbreak, and anger, Raimundi-Ortiz toggles between video and performance art, traditional portraiture, urban drawings, comics, and murals. Her work is in the permanent collections of the Orlando Museum of Art, the Jersey City Museum of Art, and Museo del Barrio, and the National Museum of Mexican Art, as well as in numerous private collections. Raimundi-Ortiz received her MFA in 2008 from Rutgers University's Mason Gross School of Art as the Ralph Johnson Bunch Distinguished Graduate Fellow. Prior to that, in 2002, she attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. And right now she's an associate professor of studio art at the University of Central Florida. As I said earlier, both artists have exhibited their work at the Portrait Gallery. In a moment, they will discuss the works that have been on view in our museum. But before that, I wanted to provide a bit of institutional context. The National Portrait Gallery has, for the last almost a decade already, been systematically engaged in a process of dissecting the historical narrative that our collection tells. And this is very much thinking about our role as a museum of national history, biography, and portraiture. So what story does our collection tell? What are the biases that are apparent in our collection? What are the lacunae, the historical lacunae, and the absences that are apparent in our collection, or perhaps not apparent, but we still need to research them and bring them about and make them visible so we can overcome them. And there's been a number of initiatives that have helped us in that process of self-reflection. One of them is the innovative performance series Identify, initiated by my colleague Dorothy Moss in 2015. This initiative has been crucial in that process of self-reflection. The series commissions artists to think about individuals and communities who have been oppressed or rendered invisible in history, and to conjure their presence in our museum through performance art. To date, the series has commissioned 10 performance artists to create these performances for our space. And it was in the context of that performance series that Wanda Raimundi-Ortiz presented her work, Pietà, in 2007. We're going to see a clip of that work now and then hear from Wanda what that work was about.
Turn me around, turn me around, turn me around, ain't gonna let segregation. Turn me around, keep on walking, keep on talking.
Wanda, good evening. I would love if you could tell us about this work that you presented within the context of Identify.
Muted. I am muted. I was being very polite and I'm muted. I should probably wear my glasses. See? So I am delighted to be part of this conversation, to be in conversation with Genevieve. I'm a huge fan of your work and a huge fan of Taína and all the work that goes on in the National Portrait Gallery. So thank you so much for having me. So the inspiration for this project came after the birth of my son, and recognizing that I was giving birth to a brown child and being a woman of color, living in the South, in the shadow of Trayvon Martin's murder, and the incredible sense of dread and responsibility for raising a child and trying to arm him the best way that I can as a light-skinned woman of color, right? Recognizing the privilege that my skin yields me that he will not be afforded, and how do I prepare him for the inevitability of things as small as being presumed incompetent, like, oh, are you sure you didn't cheat on that assignment, or to something much bigger, much more insidious. And recognizing the kind of pain and fear and struggle that parents have with their children going out into the world and hoping that they'll come home, that their child just being a good child is not enough, right? Trayvon Martin was unarmed and it wasn't enough. There was a sense of vilifying the young boy after his passing to justify the poor behavior, to justify the inhumane treatment of this person, right? And the parents. It's not just the young man, the boy, but it's also the parents. The fact that after the boy was murdered, the parents now had to deal with their son being vilified, right? And so now you can't even grieve peacefully. And then expanding that to a bigger conversation about how I didn't know Trayvon, I did not know his family, but I felt that very deeply, and I think that our community felt that very deeply as we saw, and then being told that we probably shouldn't grieve as hard, or get over it, or this is not your fight, or XYZ, insert any of the other narratives to kind of brush off the pain. And it all of this, as a young mom, or a new mom, it just kicked up a lot of stuff for me. And it was around the time of Easter. And I always have to say this, I'm a recovering Catholic, so I was indoctrinated into Catholicism from a very young age, and I'm still dealing with that. I was thinking about Mary, the story of Mary. I'm not trying to preach any gospels, just stating how the process started. Thinking about the story of Mary, thinking about her son, Jesus, thinking about how she knew the inevitability of her son's fate and couldn't stop it. And I think about what that is like for us as parents to brown children and as people of color, to say, I know what I've experienced and I know what's coming. It's not a matter of if, it's when, how, at what age will my son be when he's first made to feel less than, or made to feel frightened about his skin, or the thought that his skin is a dangerous place for him to live. And that we have this shared story. We all know what this feels like as people of color, depending, lighter skin versus darker skin. You can, you have a bit of reprieve, for lack of a better term, but we know what's out there. You may decide that you don't want to deal with it, or it's whatever, but my urgency was to create a piece that provided a space of safe collective grief, where for a few minutes you can just be in your fragility, be in your frailty rather, be in your sorrow with other people, and not feel like you were going to be judged for that. That you can be in that safe space and no one is going to tell you to get over it. And then recognizing that that space, that time is limited, right? That you don't, you know, because then you have to kind of armor up and go back into the world and go back to being who you are. And I wanted to create this performance that wasn't just about me, but it was an invitation for people to participate with me, to share in this communion, right? Again, this sort of religious language, right? But this communion of feeling and so this is kind of this part of this series of works that I've been using since about 2012, where I started to think about my own trauma and use my artwork as a place to kind of unpack the trauma and maybe not fix it, but analyze it, assess it, and then create something where it can kind of go out in the world and maybe some people will get something from it.
Thank you, Wanda. And just to give a little bit more detail about the performance, because I was fortunate enough to experience the power of it. The way that you created that space for collective grief was by inviting people one by one to come
Yes.
and rest right on your shoulder, and you provided a space for embrace, which at this time seems so difficult and almost impossible, right? But for physical contact and for a space for mourning, space for being aware of that vulnerability of bodies of color in our society.
Yeah, I'm sorry, continue.
Genevieve, I would love to speak now about your work. Genevieve's evocative photograph, Trailblazer, A Dream Deferred, is part of our current exhibition, the Outwind 2019 American Portraiture Today. This show presents the finalist works of our triennial Outwind Buchiever portrait competition, which was established in 2006 thanks to the generous endowment by the late Virginia Outwind Buchiever, who served as a docent at the Portrait Gallery for almost 20 years and wanted to invigorate the art of portraiture and to give the nation this gift of a portrait competition. And so every 3 years, we invite artists to submit their works on an online platform. The next call is coming up in just in a month from now, in October. But what's fascinating about this process is that we always review the rules to make sure that they're conducive to showcasing really a snapshot of what's happening in the realm of portraiture within the country. And that requires making sure that we're not putting obstacles ahead of the artists. So we used to have this antiquated rule now that every portrait submitted had to be the product of a direct encounter between artist and sitter. And for the first time, for this iteration that is currently on view and accessible on our website, the Outwind 2019 American Portraiture Today, we opened up that rule and we invited artists who are thinking about history and who are amending or repairing its absences to submit their work. And I think that was one of the rules that really, that new openness of the competition gave way to submissions such as Genevieve's with this very evocative photograph of a time traveler. And I would love for you, Genevieve, to talk about this work.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, so this photograph was from a larger body of work originally presented at the wow, I'm having a mind blank here. The New Orleans.
Prospect.
Thank you, Prospect. Wow. So I'm actually still like in my feelings about Wanda's piece, so I'm like a little jolted by that. But yeah, so this was part of Prospect, New Orleans. As it was kind of mentioned in my bio, my mom is white and my dad is black. Identify as a woman of color, and I kind of make work about how we navigate through the world, how other people see us, and most often people put me in the category of being white. And I kind of want to make work that breaks those kind of reads on people. or the assumptions that we, you know, put on folks. So this particular image, I thought would be a really strong read if it got picked, and it did, but, you know, for the museum. And this idea of, you know, referencing in terms of dress, the antebellum time period, thinking about hair texture and what might not go with that kind of dress, finding this portrait in an antique shop of JFK and MLK, and kind of, I don't know, seeing this person as someone that traveled ahead of time to bring back a relic to let the folks know what kind of is to come. But that sense of like tragedy in there too, because those folks are in a portrait together because they're no longer with us. Yeah, and so just like thinking about the landscape and how these trees are almost arms like grabbing at the subject, and yeah, those kinds of things I guess I was thinking about.
Yeah, thank you. And something that I find fascinating in the work that you each do is the sense of time, the idea of history and temporality, which I think you approach differently. Genevieve, I love that you've talked about this work and this woman as a time traveler, and that, you know, that conflation of temporalities you have with the 19th century dress, the 1960s portrait, and a photograph, you know, the medium of photography itself, and the printing technology, which is from today, very much from the present. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
I think time, even though this kind of lends itself to really being able to refer to like a figure or a person as the time traveler, I think that that kind of theme is an overarching theme in all of my work, because I use a lot of vintage materials to kind of get at that idea that we haven't really come as far as a lot of folks like to think we have in terms of change, and as it relates to racism and systemic racism in America and kind of all over the world, I guess.
Can you talk about the subtitle of the work? Because that's important too.
Yeah, so I often use the titling to kind of help lead the viewer on how to read the work a little bit more, either to flip how they might read it, or you know, add to kind of the breakdown of what I was kind of thinking about. So thinking about this figure, this female being the trailblazer, she's like on this mission to like let people know she kind of doesn't fit the norm, maybe from her time period. Being in New Orleans and making this work in New Orleans, I think I was thinking a lot about how I would kind of navigate in that time period and what the scenario would be if I existed in that time. It would probably be more tragic if I existed in that time, in the sense of slavery and yeah. I can get into this a little bit more, but I'm trying to be, not to mince my words, but so, you know, the figure is the trailblazer, but using the Baldwin title, A Dream Deferred, it's kind of also adding that layer of like the sadness about the figures in the framed image, that, you know, beyond that, I mean, you know, that obviously they have a legacy and a story that's been continued to be shared, but the fact that they were assassinated is kind of that, like a dream, like that's in my mind, like what A Dream Deferred is kind of referencing.
Right, and so there's this counterbalance of hope, but also pessimism altogether conflated in the image.
Totally.
Wanda, if you could also speak to that notion of time, you know, and in particular, if I think about your series of reinas, your, you know, your device of referring to the archetype of the queen and the royal archetype to address issues that are very current and already with your explanation of it, that's very apparent. But here too, in this next slide where we have the Gringa Reina and Mommy Dearest by Genevieve. And we're going to talk about other aspects of this photograph later, but tell me about that sense of temporality.
So this project, this particular piece that I created, it comes from having my own issues with my body and time and aging and you know, for lack of a better way of talking about it, you know, even the biggest of feminists that I like to think that I am, at the end of the day, you know, worry about aging, or worrying about your waistline not being snatched enough, or worrying about you know, this sense of kind of being forever youthful. And I think at the time I was thinking, I was thinking a lot about how manipulative makeup advertising is in making you feel like you need something by utilizing language to get you to think of that you're lacking, right? So if you, for example, were to go through your local drugstore and go to the beauty section, and you're going to find rejuvenate your skin, plump, lift, right? So the insinuation is you're dried, flat, kind of, you know what I mean? Just it's inferring the opposite, right? Because clearly, if you need to be rejuvenated, that means you're old. Right? And so this was incredibly manipulative. And I think at this particular point in my life, I was feeling rather fragile. I was looking at way too many Kardashian makeup tutorials, way too many. And so the image here is kind of stopping time, as if I were in the process of becoming this thing that I'm aiming for, you know. The wig is made of 3 different textures of hair, which would represent my hair at the different stages of trying to get the curl out, where you know, when it's kind of wet and just a newly drying right here by the ears, by the cheeks. And then if you blow dry it, but you do not flat iron it, it'll get kind of frizzy. Or putting the hair curlers in a very, you know, the big hair curlers and stretching the hair out and subjecting it to a lot of heat. So I wanted to represent the 3 different stages of straightening the hair to achieve a more Eurocentric beauty aesthetic. And then also employing what would I need to do to narrow my features. I was a more narrow nose, the higher cheekbones, maybe not such a broad forehead, all the things that nobody has told me this, is me. What I would have to do to look less ethnic, for lack of a better term, if that's, you know, because that's supposed to be beautiful. The contouring of the neck to try to highlight the you know, what the collarbones, this aesthetic of beauty, right? But I wanted to freeze time. I wanted people to take a real deep look. I'm sorry, you hear that racket outside? That's my family. If you didn't hear it, they're going crazy right now. Thank you very much. So that is as real as it gets. So I wanted to stop time, because these are the parts of this beauty process that you're not supposed to see, right? The contouring, the push-up bras, the what do you call it? Faja in English, faja, girdle, or whatever that is, to kind of to hold the fat together. All of these strategies that I would use to look beautiful, but then freeze it and capture it. And so there was something that I wanted to kind of reveal the underbelly of this beauty, you know?
Right, and something that I find very interesting here, if we look at these 2 images together, are the cultural references that are embedded in them, and that that can best be read by people who come who identify with those references. So for example, in your work, yes, the reference to hair processing the Latino way, let's say, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, the big rollers, and which always precede, you know, I guess perhaps people with straight hair would not think that this is the way we go around it. But when, you know, Latino hair salons do this thing of first washing the hair and then putting on big rollers, putting you under the dryer, and then straightening it, right? And so there are references here to culture, to class. The very title of the work, Gringa Reina, is very interesting too, because the prefix gringa take directly from the word gringo, right? Which is a word used through Latin America and also in Puerto Rico which is Latin America too, and the Caribbean, right? To refer to, or as a marker of a kind of otherness that signals whiteness and someone from the US. And to a certain extent, some social, economic, and political power too. But you're using it differently here, I understand. And there's a particular biographic reference, right?
Yes, yes. In my family, I've been called La Gringa, like the white girl, the Americana, because I have the fairest skin of my brothers and sisters and cousins, and not all of them, but I've been called La Gringa, I've been called La Americana for my grandfather, and I think that, I feel like it's used as a way of denoting my lack of Latinidad, or to kind of make the mark of not being as Puerto Rican as, or and with insinuating also the hierarchy of Latinidad. So if you're born from the island, oh, esa es la gringa, she's from out there. Ella viene del otro lado del charco. She comes from the other side of el otro lado del charco is like a saying, like the other side of the puddle, but meaning like the ocean. Like stateside born, not island born, and it immediately like knocks down your pedigree. And I think that there's a, especially as a stateside born Puerto Riqueña that I am, there's always this thing of like having to prove your pedigree. Okay, so I live in New York. I'm Puerto Rican from New York. I'm a gringa, but I don't say cajo. I don't say ajo. I say arroz, because I was taught to speak the way my mother spoke, and I was raised to believe that I was a Puerto Rican raised in New York, not a New Yorican per se, but that I was given all of these things. I just happened to be living on the other side of El Charco. And so there's definitely the reference of having to prove pedigree and then finding my way, then now that I have a certain level of authenticity to then, I've kept myself like checking, oh, you don't know how to make beans? Like, you know what I mean? And you get into this whole thing of like, how Puerto Rican are you? And it's this whole bob and weave thing that happens. And so that's that reference. And for me, it's double-edged, right? Much like what Genevieve was saying about using the titles to flip how you think. I don't want people to read this only as me, doing this to American or Eurocentric beauty aesthetic, although I kind of am. But the other side is critiquing the notion that this is the standard. This is what Latinos are going for. Like if you are Afro-Latino, the idea is that you want to mejorar la raza. You want to clean the race. You want to kind of try to erase Blackness from the lineage, so that way you can be more closer to La Madre España, or whatever crazy narratives people have in their mind about where we suppose who's our real patria. And so I was, this constant wrestling of like, well, look, I'm a light-skinned woman, but I consider myself Afro-Latina. My mother would tell me where that nose came from, that comes from your grandmother. Like, you know what I mean? And so this trying to negate Blackness and anti-Blackness in our community is a very real thing. And so you're striving for this sort of white aesthetic, peínate ese pelo, fix your hair, you don't go out with your hair looking like that, and go through all these steps so you can get closer to whiteness, and then at the same time be smacked around because you're gringo, because you're too American. So it's this really awful identity dichotomy that I find myself kind of caught in. And this project is where I was hoping to sort of unpack it. It's cheaper than therapy.
Thank you, Wanda. Genevieve, I was wondering if you could tell us about Mama Dearest, which is also a work imbued with cultural references. But in this case, well, it was just really, it was fascinating and amusing as well. The particular references to this work. I would love you to talk about them, but also about these notions of female beauty that Wanda, connect that to notions of female beauty that Wanda was talking about too in relation to this work.
Sure, of course. I just wanted to backtrack quickly and just say that I misspoke on my title reference, and that's actually a Langston Hughes poem. So fast forward to where we are now. Mama Dearest title, kind of giving it like a black spin on a play off of the film Mama Dearest, or Mommy Dearest. And I like looking at these two images together. It's like Wanda's chick is like sizing me up in a way. And I'm also like the blended out version of what you've created. But I don't know, this makes me think about where it was shot, being in Los Angeles, this kind of reference to film, but at the same time thinking about how, or thinking about drag culture in a way, but not in the sense of necessarily different sexes acting in, in the opposite, but more of that idea of how females have to kind of perform their beauty as like a standard. And I think something that Wanda and I both kind of wrestle with, or we have a clear understanding of, that we don't fit the ideal beauty standard. And so we're kind of embracing that and poking fun at it at the same time. Yeah, I think that's the fascinating, like, to hear Wanda speak about her work and just, kind of learning more about how to process what I'm doing. Because sometimes I feel like I'm just kind of going through the motions and just being like, I haven't really unpacked why I'm doing this completely. So Wanda's work kind of almost peels away layers.
Mm-hmm. Can we go to the work Lady Bird and talk a little bit more about that, about process? Genevieve, I would love to hear from both of you. How do you, what's your process to creating to creating your work? Do you have the character you're playing, or the cliche of womanhood, or the issue of identity that you want to tackle immediately present, or does it evolve? Does it come out kind of intuitively?
I think,
Genevieve.
Yeah, I think I have like a catalog of all these references in my head that I'm not always sure exactly what I'm gonna pinpoint until after maybe the photograph exists. I can kind of place it better. The photographic part of my practice is honestly like the harder part for me, because I already feel like I navigate through the world as this kind of question mark. And so then when I put on these other costumes and then I have to go out into the world and photograph, I kind of feel like I'm being read how that person is seen, and I don't really understand that fully. So it's kind of this push-pull that happens to get me to actually create the photographs. This particular body of work, or this group of photographs, was a little bit easier because it was shot in my studio. I didn't have to go out into the world to make them. And the backdrops of each of the women are the collage panels that I previously wallpapered, and before I put the collage materials on top of them, I use them as backdrops. So there would be kind of a thread between the larger presentation of works. But this particular group of images sparked some, interesting conversations. I had given a talk about my work, and as I'm doing here, you hope that folks understand that I am biracial. My mom is white, my dad is black, so I'm kind of grappling with those two sides, and how I fit in the world. And so I later on had a conversation with a woman who mentioned, it's interesting in this group of images, there's only one Black person represented. And I said to her, that sounds like a comment that's more about you than about me or what I've actually created here, because I'm actually referencing the wig ads from the Ebony and Jet magazines, and often those images, or often those hairstyles, I guess, were based off of whiteness because of this kind of, this need to kind of fit in that has been put on us since day one. And, I kind of just was unpacking that for her and how that sounded to me, because I was like, oh, well, you still don't see me as Black, even though I've told you who I am. And that's something you have to work through.
Something that I love about this work is how different the psychological spaces that these women inhabit are, as opposed to the central figure, the woman with the afro, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I guess there has to be a strength in ownership of your natural self. And I think in the other wigs, it's kind of like performing on top of, almost like you get into the character of whiteness when you put on that thing that we're supposed to fit. I guess I think of normalcy is kind of like what we're told we're supposed to strive to, and normalcy is basically defined as whiteness, so it's kind of grappling with those. I guess I never really thought about it when I was creating it. But to look at it now and think about how almost what would the person that had this hairstyle maybe project? I don't know.
Yes.
Because, wearing your hair like a giant cotton candy thing is normal, right? That's natural. That's what we aspire to. And ain't it funny how much effort to get that big poof you'd have to go through if you had silky hair, but then you have our hair that you could do it on command without even blinking, and you got to straighten it to make other people feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And then, right?
That's the push-pull, I think, that I'm talking about,
Yeah.
And I think overall, that feeling of never being happy with what you've got.
Yeah.
And that's more of a psychological thing. I don't know if that's directly connected to race, but there's probably a factor in there.
Yeah, I think there's also there's also this idea of the savagery of natural hair, right? How could you there's something about managing all that nature, managing all that Blackness, make it go away so that I don't have to deal with you, so that I don't, I remember having an interaction, and so much of my work comes from just processing real things that have happened to me that I hold on to way too deeply. The things are very, very cutting, and people kind of just walk away from the things that they leave in your life, in your space, in your psyche. I remember being newly woke in my 20s and, no longer blow drying my hair, letting my hair get as big as it wanted to be. And the first person to rain that down on me was my mother. You're too pretty to be having your hair like that, ... big out. So because I am who I am, the more she fought, the bigger it got. And, props to Colin Kaepernick. So, I remember at a job that I had in this sort of corporate real estate office that I worked in, I had a dinky job, but I'm there with my little outfits and whatever urban version of sophisticat that I thought I could put together on my Third Avenue, Third Avenue in the Bronx shopping endeavors and what I could afford, my little $7 an hour. I wear my little suit and go with my hair natural. And this woman asked me, that I worked with very closely, one day she stopped me and she was like, can you do something to make your hair less savage-like? To my face. So again, being who I am, I told her, I'm like, when you wake up in the morning, you wash and go? She says, yes. I said, so do I. So are you insinuating that I wake up 2 hours early to process my hair so you feel more comfortable with me? Cool. Needless to say, I lost that job for that and a couple of other reasons. But the fact that these are the kinds of narratives that we deal with, that people kind of put onto us, I could look a lot less Black if I wanted to. Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you take that option or something? You know what I mean? And whatever that narrative is that people kind of put onto you, and that affects that you carry that with you, and it finds its way into the work. That the whole gringa reina, the straightening of the hair, going to the Dominican salon and having the Dominican women asking you, well, you're going to blow it, te va a pasar, blow it, you're going to get it blown out or alisado. I'm like, no, don't blow it. What do you mean you're not going to straighten it? Clutch and pearls and what? Just cut it. I cut it because I can't cut it myself, but I didn't ask you to do anything else. Don't get into whatever. Just cut it and let me be. And so you're getting it from both sides,
There's two works by you that I would love for us to talk about tonight too, because they present pretty much opposing strategies of how to address the issue of how being a person of color has been traditionally associated with servitude. And one of them is Miss Americana by you, Genevieve, your recent collage. I would love if we could speak about that. And the other one, which we will talk about right after, is Bargain Basement Sovereign. If we could talk about this work, Miss Americana.
Yeah, so this work was birthed out of some of my sculptural works. It's so in my thrifting, I find a lot of the salt and pepper mammies, shaker mammies, and I also find these figurines called Royal Daltons, which is kind of just like the porcelain white woman in a fancy dress. And so I work with a fabricator. I bring the two figurines, the heads are removed from each, and the mammy head goes on the body of the woman in the dress in this attempt to further her story. She's no longer stuck in the position of servant. So in my studio, I have all these headless mammy figurines, and I wanted to create a scenario where the roles have been reversed in the opposite way. So I found these magazine images of stars from the 60s, 50s, and 60s. And I decided to put their heads on the bodies of the mammy figurines. And this kind of, removing the neck, these are all things that I think about when you see that figurine, like the person isn't really fully realized, it's kind of a caricature of Blackness that I want to dismantle. But before I do that, I want to say, how do you like it, in this kind of reference? And then kind of ending it with an image of Kim Kardashian, who in a way is kind of like this modern day mammy figurine in terms of how she's kind of altered herself towards the things that for so many years we've been told aren't made to be seen as beautiful, bigger bottoms and, just accentuating the form. So honestly, like, I don't know, like a lot of times I'm making work that that scares me in a way. So like, I don't really know, like, if I can get away with this, but I'm trying to kind of by doing it, ask more questions. If that makes sense. Oh, you're muted.
It's quite a violent conceptual gesture to decapitate these mammy figures and dismantle the stereotype that way, and then present the face of a Hollywood classic white actress. And you take pretty much the opposite approach, Wanda, I think, in your bargain basement sobering. You invite the public to really to confront their complicity in keeping people of color at the bottom of the economic echelons. Can you talk about this work?
So it's interesting. When I was doing this project, I wasn't thinking about that at all, but it's a great read, you know what I mean? And I think it's, especially now, I was thinking more about being Latina and being submissive, right? I kept thinking about this notion of being, because people have this idea that Latinas are so fiery, and I can't believe you got with that person, she's gonna put you in your place, until your male counterpart arrives. And all of a sudden, you know what I mean? And this immediate sense of submission. And so I wanted to create this woman who was impossible to ignore. And when I'm wearing that thing, that whole outfit, between the heels and the hair, I'm well over 6 feet, like easily over 6 feet. And you can't tell me that you ain't looking at my boobies. You can't tell me that, you know, because I'm wearing this big red bustier, and I'm impossible to ignore. And I walk in and I have this court of ladies that are with me. They flank me, and I won't talk to anyone. And I walk in with this kind of authority, like, guess who just got here, right? But the only way to talk to me is to put trash on me, right? And maybe I'll talk to you back, maybe. And I think so there was more a sense of my being poised and remaining poised in this really screwed up, messed up situation that I've designed, that I participate, and then the public becomes complicit in that way, right? Where you don't. And when I've talked about this piece in the past, I've talked about it as this way of like turning the mirror on intimate relationships, where you don't realize how much shit you leave on people's lap. You know, your friends, your parents, your lovers. You know, you call your best girl, oh my God, he did it again. Blah, 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 blah. You dropped all your garbage in there, and then you walk away. Then you go, you figure it out, then you move on with your life. But you never bother to go check with your people after they've had to process all the shit you just left on them, right? And we do this in our relationships. I was thinking about that very intimately, like a very close situation. It was, again, ex-lover, terrible human being, nasty human being, and was talking to me and all kinds of reckless. And I was like, you know, who you think you're talking to like that? And he's like, oh, you know, you're my queen. And I'm like, I'm your bargain basement sovereign. I rule for less, right? I say taking shit all the time. And I realized that that's a position that we ourselves, you know, this is, I think, less of a cultural thing in terms of like it's socioeconomic, but more like this, listen, I'm letting you talk to me all kinds of crazy and I deserve better. But I don't even know what that looks like. I don't even know what it is to sort of be able to stand up for myself and be like, I'm not participating in this. And you know what I mean? And so there's this kind of moment of, look, I can't do this without you. You're bringing the garbage to me, and I'm sitting and I'm looking at you while you do it, and I'm going to be as poised as I can, because that's expected of me to keep rising to whose expectation. And when I think about culturally, I think about, and heads are probably going to get mad. I'm probably going to get inboxed all kinds of crazy. I will try to be ready for it. But I think that there's the damage of us not knowing how to stand up for ourselves, right? Because you haven't seen it yet, right? You can't copy something you've never seen. So you can't really stand up because it hasn't been taught to you to like be, to have a real deep sense of worth that you can elevate yourself from this moment and then move forward, right? And I know that's a dangerous thing to say out loud, but there is something to be said about that. And I look at it now, I'm like, yeah, I sat there in the quintessential, the red and black, the quasi, Española with the stole and the long train and the hot, spicy, all the tropes, and then just sat there and took shit. I said nothing. Right.
I think that's very interesting that I gave. So this is really more about gender dynamics, but I gave it more of an economic reading.
But if you look at it, it is definitely, I mean, it can absolutely be read like that. And that's something that I really appreciate is the cold read, and we're looking at this moment now where, Puerto Rico, how our island is being treated, how our people are being treated, how our people are being treated here. There's a million different things that we can look at, that we can read this as this sort of stand-in, the tattered collar, things that are kind of jankily made, but still poised. So when I made this piece, I was definitely thinking about gender dynamics, but thinking about my Puerto Ricanness and being a Latina, Boricua, in that context, right? And the way white men responded to me in the spaces or as I walked, this is like an invitation to objectify me. Look at all of the abundanza, right? But don't touch me.
So I'm afraid we're running out of time to ask more questions, and I had so much more in my outline here, but we have been getting some questions from our audience, and our friend Isela Carbonell is asking a question that I also had actually, about how many of your works can change over time depending on what's going on currently. In particular, about the very first works by both of you that we discussed, Pietà and Trailblazer. I wonder what those works mean to you in the current context when, of course, after the killing of George Floyd and when the Black Lives Matter movement has finally gained the currency, and as a society, we're finally understanding the urgency of this moment. I wonder how you view these works now, what they mean to you now. Wanda.
I don't want this piece to still be relevant. Unfortunately, this is where we are, right? Where we're in a place where a man, I'm gonna start crying in a second, but a man was crying out for his mama, and we watched it, and then we're told to get over it again, with police unions telling people that they're wrong to feel the way they feel, and we're watching it, everything become politicized, and then being told that we don't have the right to feel the way we feel, we don't have the right to stand up. I don't want this piece to be relevant. I would like for it to be like, you know what? This was a piece where we talked about lives interrupted, and what you don't see in the clip is, I hold 33 people for 3 minutes, 33 seconds, the reference to Jesus at the time of his execution, right? And then you hear the sirens go off, blue and red sirens go off, and that's the moment when the person has to get up and leave. And that's what I was thinking about, the moment when you're home and the cop cars show up to let you know your son is this, your daughter is this, a life was just interrupted, right? I don't want that. People were asking me if I was going to resurrect this again. This piece took so much out of me to do. I don't want to have to be able to do this again because we still haven't learned, right? When George Floyd died, my little one looked at me and said, is that going to happen to me? What do you do with that? What do you do with that? I'm asking everyone to consider that, right? Where we've made huge strides forward, and then this piece is just as relevant as it was when I did it then. We could have done it in the 60s, and we're probably going to be able to do it well ahead into the future. Genevieve, get me out of here because I'm getting hot again. I'm getting hot.
I mean, no, everything you're saying is so true, and it is sad that this is all still relevant, and I think that's what we're kind of, or at least like what I was saying, what I'm getting at is that we really haven't come as far, and how much time has to pass, for these things to shift, and for human lives to not be taken the way they've been taken. And I think that this image has a sadness to it because, you know, this time traveler, if you will, only went ahead so far to bring back this one, you know, article, but just kind of thinking about her going back or going ahead into where we are now, and what she would bring back is not too far from the evidence of, again, lives being taken.
Well, I want to thank you both for speaking about your work tonight. This has been really powerful. And I want to encourage everybody to come back and join us in just a couple of weeks when we'll have Li Mingwei and Barita Polson speaking with Leslie Orena. I'm kind of speechless. This was super moving. So thank you, Taína. Thank you, Genevieve, and thank you, Wanda. And please come back and share some time with Portal and the National Portrait Gallery, where we believe that portraiture is powerful.